Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rarely Typical, a podcast where I'm talking about living with a chronic illness, finding hope, and living a life that is rarely typical. Today, I have a very special guest with me. If you are in the PH community, you have heard about Eric because Eric is very popular right now. And I am so excited to have you on my podcast today. But if you are not in the PH community and you have a chronic illness, welcome. Eric was diagnosed with pulmonary arterial hypertension like I was, and we're both just living our lives. And I am excited to have him today because we're going to chat about men with chronic illness, but also men with PH, which is very rare and very small community. And I think that it'll be very important because I do know another male with PAH, and I think it's important to give both sides of the story. And so, hey, Eric, glad to have you.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate this very much.
Why don't we start off by you telling us about yourself? Anything
Yeah.
you want.
So I'm 52 years old from Los Angeles, California. I was diagnosed with idiopathic PAH 5 years ago this past September. I collapsed and nearly died. I spent 16 days in the ICU and collapsed from severe right ventricular heart failure and was diagnosed with idiopathic PAH. In the hospital, I was stabilized. I didn't think I was going to originally leave the hospital. Then it was during COVID, so it was just my wife in the hospital with me. Once I was stabilized, they gave me 2 to 4 months to live, sent me home, said, make him comfortable and let him live out the rest of his life. While I was in the hospital, I made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to die. And I didn't know what I was diagnosed with. I just knew that I wasn't going to die. It was during COVID. I was home. I collapsed in the bedroom. If it weren't for COVID, I wouldn't be here today because my kids were home on Zoom, like all kids were at that time. My daughter saw me collapse. And so I was taken to the hospital, and nobody in my world had ever heard of PAH before. It's as you said, it's a very rare disease. In men, it's extremely rare, especially when it's idiopathic. I was adopted. I am adopted. So, there is no birth lineage. I don't have any real genetic history. So I was diagnosed with asthma when I was young. And so I collapsed. And when I was in the hospital, the side effects, I was put on prostacyclin, and the side effects were awful, as you can attest to. The side effects are just terrible. And as my psychologist says, I had two angels in the hospital who were my nurses, and they got me up and got me walking. And I learned very early on that the walking helped somewhat mitigate the side effects of the medication that I was on. I was put on a pump, and so I started walking, and a lap around the hole turned into 2 laps around the hole. And then, eventually I was stabilized and I was sent home, and I continued to walk. And all of a sudden I'm sent home, and everybody's scrambling to learn what PAH is. It's this brand new disease. I don't know how sick I am. The only thing I know is I'm on this pump. I'm going to be on this pump forever. But the more I can titrate up on this medication, the better the chance I have to live. So I just start to power through, and I start to walk. And a block turns into 2, turns into 3. Next thing you know, I'm walking a mile, 2, 3, and I'm starting to go in for echoes. And, every couple of weeks, every month I go in for an echo, my right ventricle is starting to make a little bit better of a recovery. And it just pushes me harder. And I'm walking longer distances. I'm abiding by a strict diet, which I still do to this day. I'm on limited fluids, which I'm still on today because I still have liquid in my heart. And I talk to a psychologist once a week, which I started back then, which I still do today, because I've learned the importance of positive mental health, living with a chronic disease. And then I really started relying on what I call my village, my family, my friends, my neighbors, my doctors, anybody that I knew would support me. I started really to rely on, because in those, I tell people I was really sick, and I'll get into that later, but I was sick. This was something that just happened overnight. I mean, it was a period of years that led up to me collapsing. And I was always a very social person. I loved being around friends. I loved being around family. And in those few years leading up to when I collapsed, I was pulling back. I was terrified. I was afraid to find out what was wrong. And again, I'll get into that a little bit, but I wasn't avoiding, I was terrified. And I was getting worse and worse and worse. And I didn't know what it was. So I was pulling back. I was pulling back from my family and friends. I was pulling back from my wife. I was pulling back from my kids. I was going to the office to hide. And so after I was diagnosed and I came home, I immediately embraced everybody again and immediately started to understand the importance of your village. So between modern medicine, between positive mental health, between exercise, nutrition, and my village, all what I call pieces of my pie, I started to develop this recovery formula. And after a year, my RV almost made a complete recovery. I was taken off of the pump. I was put on oral meds, and now I'm on a triple therapy, which I'll be on for the rest of my life. The side effects still suck almost daily, but I've learned that walking really helps with it. And it helps with positive mental health. It's almost a 50-50 thing at this point in my life. So here I am 5 years later. If I walked into a doctor's office, I'm undiagnosable, but obviously I have PAH. There's no cure for it. The medicine is really what's helping me at that, but it's all of it. It's the walking, it's the positive mental health, it's the nutrition, it's the village. It's how I live my life now. So I've dedicated my life to my health. I've dedicated my life to my family, and I've dedicated my life to raising awareness and for PAH. And then we started the Where is EB movement and raising money and awareness for PAH and pulmonary hypertension in general. And I'm also, my story now is really, it's transformed into a message of overcoming adversity and taking that next step and providing hope. So that's really what the second chapter of my life has become. And I told my wife, if one day when I'm not here, if I've helped just one person, then I've done my job. And that's really what I've dedicated the second part of my life to. I walk upwards of 15 miles a day now, between 4,500 and 5,000 miles a year. I just did the second annual Where is EB, where I walked from LA to San Diego, 205 miles in 6.5 days, all to raise awareness for this, not only this rare disease, but pulmonary hypertension in general.
You're such a big deal. You're like everybody's favorite person right now. I wanted to touch on something that you did talk about. I mean, obviously, PAH in males is so rare. Did you feel like when you were in diagnosis, do you feel like they were looking for everything else? How did they get to the PAH? Did they think it was like, all of these other things before they got there because it's so rare?
That's a great question. And so like you said, it's a rare disease to begin with, right? It's even more rare in men. So like I said, I knew I was sick. Like something was wrong. It probably started 3 or 4 years earlier so I was diagnosed with asthma as a kid. And one of the biggest misdiagnoses for PAH is asthma. And so, to go back a little further, so I have 3 children. When my youngest was born, I started running. I was never a runner. I played baseball and I played soccer, and I started running to get in shape. And so I was running and I was taking an over-the-counter supplement that had nitric oxide in it, which in hindsight is a bronchodilator, so that's one of the medications that we take is to open up your airways. And so after I stopped running, I went off of that supplement and I immediately noticed that my breathing had changed a little bit. Didn't think much of it because I had asthma. And so it got a little better. And then I remember I was coaching my daughter in softball and I looked down one day and I had swelling in my legs. And I'm like, that's not normal. But I thought, okay, maybe a change in diet will change that. So I changed my diet. And by doing so, I probably lowered the sodium intake. And so my swelling went down. And I kind of went through that roller coaster for about a year. Then I started noting that the breathing was getting a little worse. and that breathing gets a little worse, and you start going up inclines and it's starting to get harder to breathe. And things were kind of going off in my head like, this isn't normal, but I don't need to go to the doctor, as a stubborn male. And so, then it kind of got a little worse and worse, and the swelling got a little worse. And then it got to the point where it wasn't a roller coaster anymore. Then it just started to progressively go downhill. That's when I really started to get frightened. We took a trip to Yellowstone 2 years before I collapsed, and I probably shouldn't have made it out of that trip. I got off the airplane, and for anybody that's been to the Jackson Hole Airport, you walk off of the plane onto a tarmac. And I was at 7,000 feet elevation, and my body shut down. Scared me to death. But again, I was so scared to find out what was wrong that I kind of was like, I was pulling back. So I wasn't the typical patient that I was going to the doctor asking what was wrong and they were misdiagnosing me. I was the male that wasn't going to the doctor when something was wrong. And one of the things that I've learned in men, and one of my biggest lessons for men listening out there, is that upwards of 75% of men don't go to the doctor when something's wrong. And that mistake almost took my life. And the one bit of advice I would give to anybody listening is don't ignore symptoms. Don't ignore things that are wrong. I learned that I wasn't alone, so I can't have guilt over that. But the signs were there. And because I had asthma, I was able to go to the doctor and kind of convince the doctor that I had asthma. The one thing I did learn is you really got to advocate for yourself, because doctors sometimes they don't always pay that much attention unless you're kind of bringing the attention to it. So to answer your question, no, because I didn't go to the doctor when I should have.
I thought when I was diagnosed, they were trying to figure out what was causing it. And when I was younger, I was a very competitive soccer player, but I also thought I had exercise asthma because I would have a really hard time catching my breath, but it wasn't all the time. And I was in high school and in college and I was young, right? And so I just thought, wow, I'm like really out of shape. And then when I started getting the swelling in my legs, I knew something was wrong, but I am just like you and hate the doctor and hated going to the doctor. So I did not go until I ended up in the ER and got diagnosed. But I totally get it. It always makes me wonder if I guess I've always had it, because it's been years of just weird things that probably could have amounted to PAH. But then it's also like pregnancy can induce PAH. And so was it always there and it just lied dormant and then pregnancy pushed it over the edge, or did the pregnancy cause it? But for me, it's like really hard to figure out because what came first, the chicken or the egg,
Yeah. And I wonder the same thing. And it's funny you say that. I've heard that a couple times because, so I was diagnosed with asthma. It wasn't all the time like you. Sometimes it was athletic induced, but most of the time it was induced like when I would get sick, it would trigger something in my lungs and it would hit and especially as an adult. As an adult, every time I got sick, it would hit my lungs hard. In hindsight, about 4 years prior to collapsing, I was hospitalized with sepsis, and it was a very benign cut in my hand that got infected. And I heard from other people that have PAH that they had these very benign injuries, and then they were diagnosed with PAH later. And I'd heard that almost like my body was starting to fight the PAH, so it couldn't kind of fight the infection. So I don't know. I've always wondered the same thing, was it lying dormant? Because I would have slight breathing issues, but I never thought twice about it because like you're diagnosed with something else. And then when it started to get worse and worse and worse, you go onto Google, right? And Google, it's the worst. And it says COPD, but I don't smoke, so it wasn't that. And it probably listed 10 different things, but if it would have said PAH, I had never heard of PAH. So that would have been, that would have been just a foreign language to me.
Yeah, I had this really weird cough. Like I got really sick at one point when I was in college, and I obviously didn't go to the doctor. So I was sick like way longer than I should have been had I just gone and gotten antibiotics probably. but I always had this like really weird, like dry smoker's cough. And my husband and I dated, I mean, not long, but like for a couple of years after we got married, I always had the cough. And when I got diagnosed, he had actually never known me without this cough. And then I started on medication and my PAH got better and I don't cough anymore. And so then I'm like, wait, well, have I had it since college? It's always weird to try and think about what caused it or if I caused it or if it just has always just been there, just waiting for the right moment to come up.
Yeah.
So I have lots of PAH friends, obviously, but all of my PAH friends are women. And I find it to be very helpful because I know a lot of people like me and people who have had kids and are dealing with all of that stuff that comes with postpartum and then being diagnosed after pregnancy. But there aren't a lot of males with PAH. Do you find that it's kind of isolating? Do you feel weird not having a lot of, I guess, camaraderie?
Yeah. I try to think if I've met a couple men through, through support groups and things like that I've spoken to, but I'm trying to think. I haven't met many men with it. And if it is, it's because I'm introduced as a speaker to a patient group or a support group. So yeah, I haven't. And when you ask me that question, all these questions, they trigger different things. And so like I've spent a lot of time, especially recently, advocating and sharing my story. And I've found that I'm branching out of PH and PAH, maybe because of that, because there aren't a lot of men that I can share my story to. And I think there are a lot of positive lessons that I'm learning through my recovery and my journey that work for me that I feel would work for other men. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's isolating, but there aren't a lot, there's a lot more women but even then, I mean, I'm fairly new into this world with advocating and with sharing, but it's always amazing and heartwarming. And it always just gives me chills like shit to have these conversations because there's not a lot of people out there that I've met that are patients.
Yeah. I only know one other person besides you. And I guess I just thought about it the other day. I was like, I have, a couple of girlfriends that were in a group chat and we're talking about our symptoms and stuff. And I was like, man, I don't know any guys besides you and this guy that lives here. And that's got to be kind of hard. But it is very nice to be in the advocating world because, like, chronic illness as a whole, everybody kind of gets it, right? So it isn't as isolating when you start opening up the world of advocacy and you start meeting other people. I don't know a lot of guys that advocate though either. So not just the PAH part, but like men being vulnerable, especially on the internet and documenting things, right? Like always having your phone out. Like those are just not normal guy things. Like I think my husband cannot be bothered to take a picture. And so the advocating space for males is also just very different. I only know a couple of male advocates that like really advocate, but you were beyond what some of the stuff they're doing is. So do you think that men are talking about it enough? Do you think there needs to be more male advocates?
It can never hurt for sure. One of the things that I learned very early on was, like I've talked about, the importance of village and the importance of sharing. So I've always felt sharing my story is therapeutic to myself. When I talk about it, it equally helps me as it would help anybody else that I'm talking to. And so when I was diagnosed and I came home, I really relied and I laid into my friends and my family. And even when I walk, every honk of the horn, just, it gives me a boost. And so while I haven't found it necessarily in the PAH community from other men and just people in general, really until this last year and I'm meeting amazing people like yourself, I've really learned to trust that people care and know that people care and they want to talk about not only the good, but the bad, I've learned that people want to hear when you have a bad day. They're there for you. And that goes back and forth. Before I got sick, I have an amazing group of guy friends. Most of my friends I've had since junior high and high school, but I'm 52. So I have some very long lasting friends. And then I've met other friends along the way that I'm very close with. And I have a close family, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, just a very close family. But I'll really talk about like my guy friends for a second. And, the males in that group. I've learned that the conversations are deeper now. You know,
Hmm.
we talk about things now, whereas before it may have been more superficial. Now we talk about things. And I think by me opening up, it allows other people to open up and be safe in opening up. So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to the advocating part, the talking and the advocacy to the philanthropic part of me, we've always been philanthropic as a family. It was taught to us by my mom and dad that it was important to give back. And so it's something that's always come naturally to me. And so after I was diagnosed, we have a foundation and we started looking to fund research. And we met some doctors at National Jewish Health and we started funding PAH research there. And so when I started getting better, my oldest daughter came to me and said, Dad, I'd like to do a fundraiser to raise awareness and money for this rare disease that you live with. So that's where we started Where's EB. And we then met a Dr. Patty George, who I know you've met, and her enthusiasm was infectious. And we learned about the organization that she had started and I got in that now I'm involved with. And we started raising money from them. Really, the awareness and the advocacy started with wanting to give back. And it kind of like, it's morphed out of that. I've always said I'm a patient, I'm a father and a husband and a family person first. I'm a friend, but I'm a patient. And I feel that there's so much that people can learn from my story, but that I feel very fortunate. I feel very blessed that I've been able to, dedicate my life to my health, that I have the best doctors, that I have really good health insurance, that I don't have to worry about a lot of things that so many people living with this disease and other chronic diseases have to worry about. And so the healthier I've gotten, I feel like it's a responsibility that I give back and that I use everything that I've been so fortunate to have in my life and am still fortunate in the second chapter of my life that I feel it's a responsibility. When I walk up a hill, I feel like I got the weight on my shoulders of raising awareness for this rare disease, raising money for people that need it most. And so, it's kind of that tail wagging the dog, but it's that one helps the other, right? My advocacy helps raise awareness, which hopefully helps raise money to help those that need it most. So it's like this whole thing. But to answer your initial question, I think because there aren't a lot of people with this disease and there's not a lot of men, I haven't met any men with this disease. I've really relied on everybody else. And as a byproduct of that, helping others. And so, taking the pictures and doing the reels, and I'm not natural at all. This is natural. Talking, speaking, doing a lot of things is natural. Picking up a phone is the most unnatural thing I could do. I didn't have Instagram until my daughters got it. I was never on social media. So it's like the most unnatural thing. I'm getting better at it and it's still a running joke in our house. But yeah, it's something that I feel like I have to do. I feel like it's my responsibility to help others. And by doing so, I'm advocating.
I love it. I do love that you are open with your life. It is very hard to be an online advocate, right? It's one thing to be a philanthropic advocate that does stuff and it's not on social media at all. It's a completely different thing to take on the void of the internet and like the people on the internet, and then to be vulnerable in this kind of space and share the real things that are going on with our bodies and our families and all of the highs and the lows that come with chronic illness. It's very hard to be vulnerable online. And so I applaud you because it's just not a natural male thing by any means. And then to be doing all of that plus being an advocate online in this space is just so rare. And so I love your stuff and I love you and I think you're awesome.
Oh,
So I'm
thank you.
glad that you're doing it.
I appreciate that. And I will say, you hit a couple really important things. Number one, my family, my parents, my brother, they're private. And so it took a little bit of getting used to that I was so open and, wanting to share. It's my story, I keep other things private, but I find it very therapeutic for me to talk about me. And my mom and dad's particularly are very appreciative of everything that I'm doing. So proud. But it's the opposite of what they're all used to. It's taken some getting used to. But one of the things my wife says all the time is I'm very good at talking about the positives, right? Like how good I feel or the amount I've walked. It's really easy to post or share when you go walk. Like for me, which is going to sound crazy, but like on a Friday, I go walk 30 miles and I'm like, I walk 30 miles and that's easy. The hardest things to do are talk about when you're having a really bad day and putting that on video or talking about that on the internet or posting or doing something. That's the hard part. The hard part, the easy part are the lessons you learn. The hard part is when you're going through it.
Mhm.
And so that's something that I'm getting used to because I think it's really important that people do see the struggles because it's an invisible disease, which you're so amazing at really highlighting. It is invisible and you forget that. And when somebody sees me, like if somebody met me, they would think, oh my God, this 52-year-old is in incredible shape. But I'm living with this chronic disease that doesn't have a cure. And we don't know what tomorrow, nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring, but that takes on a different definition when you're living with PAH. So that's one of the things that's been the hardest is not only talking about the good, but talking about the hard.
Yeah. And it's so cringy when I feel like I should take a video or a picture of the struggle because yes, we always put our best foot forward, right? You always put your best foot forward on social media. That's what we've always been taught. And then like for me to be laying on the floor because I'm wiped from doing whatever I was doing, I feel like it's so cringy to take a picture of yourself. It's like taking a picture of yourself when you're crying. Hate that. But also, I do feel like those are the moments that one are the most powerful and two are the realest. And I'm all about real people, and I want to see the real rawness of people. And I don't want people to meet me in real life and say, oh, she only shares the good parts. She never talks about the bad part. I would hate for somebody to meet me and think that I wasn't authentic online as I am in person. And so there's a very fine line. It's a hard one to walk.
It is. And, my wife, my kids, they say when I do post those, and I'll be honest, it's not often because it is the hardest thing to do. Most days I can walk through it literally and I feel okay. But on some days I have to go back to bed and it's debilitating. Side effects are debilitating. And it's the hardest thing to do is to realize you're going through it and say, take a picture of me going through this. But when I do it, I get the most feedback. Not only do you get the most feedback, but you get the most loving and heartfelt feedback. And, because again, unless you're living with us, you don't see it on a daily basis. People may get 30 minutes of you. They may go out to dinner with you. They may go on a weekend with you, but unless they really spend a lot of time with you, they don't see the struggle. They don't see that daily struggle that you go through when you're on these medications. And there's the whole mental health part of this that I talk a lot about. And there's that struggle too. And so there's a lot, but yeah, it is like you say, it's the cringiest because it's just not a natural thing to take a picture when you're not feeling well,
No, it's not. And it's also, I think for me, after being diagnosed and like now who I am now is definitely not who I was pre-diagnosis, but I one, hate emotions, and I hate being vulnerable. And my best friend's a therapist, and she tells me I need to work through this all the time. All of those things are so outside of my natural instinct. And so to be doing what I'm doing, had you told me when I was 25 that I would be sharing videos of myself in bed after being exhausted, I would have been like, no freaking way, you know? But it has taught me a lot about vulnerability, and I do appreciate it more now that I know how hard it is to show, right? I appreciate seeing it online because I know how I felt, how cringy it was in that moment. But I also know that there's a lot of power in being vulnerable enough to show those things. And it's especially hard, I think, for a guy. I think for a girl, I don't know, most girls like being the center of attention and are happy to talk about their emotions and that kind of stuff. But I feel like for a guy, specifically online, I feel like it's so much harder and even probably cringier for you guys to take pictures of yourself like being in pain. Like my husband hates to be like an issue, right? He hates to be the one that's weak or having a hard day or he's sick or whatever. And so to also ask him to take a picture in that moment, he probably would throw my phone against the wall. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the last thing, you ever want to be is a burden. And
Yeah.
I don't do any of this for sympathy, right? And sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like if I'm doing it, it's like I'm trying to get sympathy and I'm not. I'm just trying to show the realities of this. And yeah, men are different. We've always been taught, and I think today's world is definitely different than like my generation and growing up. But you're taught to be tough and you're taught to pick yourself up and, brush your knees off and go. And the one thing that I've learned is talking about your feelings is important. Letting people know how you feel is important. Another thing that I talk a lot about is the importance of positive mental health. And like I said, I've spoken with a psychologist. I speak with one every week. I've done that ever since I got home from the hospital. I learned the importance of that through marriage counseling. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary, and we've always had an amazing marriage, but in those years leading up to me collapsing, it was definitely strained because of my health. Like I said, I was hiding. My wife didn't know what was wrong. She could see I was sick, but couldn't get me to the doctor and was terrified. And so that was starting to put a strain on our marriage. So we started seeing a marriage therapist, and it's the best thing that we ever did. And by doing so, I learned to trust therapy. And so when I came home from the hospital, it wasn't even something that I thought about. It was like, okay, I'm going to talk to a psychologist. He deals with near death and post-traumatic stress and things like that. And I say to people, not only did my cardiologist save my life and the people in the ICU, but my psychologist has helped save my life, because living with a chronic disease, living with a terminal disease, living with a disease that doesn't have a cure, you deal with different things, and you have things that come up that wouldn't necessarily come up. And the importance of positive mental health is critical in anything. And so I talk a lot about it, and I've learned why does walking make me feel good? I've asked that question. Why does walking make me feel good? And it's been explained to me that, well, when I walk, I'm distancing myself from the ICU. So I feel like I'm getting better and better. When I walk and I look in the reflection of a building or in a mirror after I've walked 30 miles, I don't see myself as a patient. I don't see myself as Eric Borstein. I see myself as Evie, somebody who's this person that's just like kicking ass. And then the third thing I've learned is really positive mental health is equatable to finding something you love to do. And for me, that has been walking. For other people, that could be chess, it could be swimming, it could be soccer, it could be anything, right? It could be something that you just love to do. And so I have found positive mental health in walking. And so that helps me. But people don't want to talk about that, and men don't want to talk about that. But I feel like the more I talk about it, especially spouses, like wives and girlfriends, all say, well, thank you, because I'm going to go talk to my boyfriend. I'm going to go talk to my husband, or I'm going to get him to go to the doctor, or he needs to talk to somebody, or we need to talk to somebody together. And so by talking about it, I have just found that it, again, not only helps me, but it's helping others. So I'm going to keep doing it.
I love it. Well, that concludes our podcast today. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. We will do an entire episode on exercise, which I don't have a lot to contribute to. So you'll
I
listen
can't
to
wait.
EB talk about it.
I can help with it.
If you like this podcast, if you got something from it, please like it and subscribe, and we will catch you guys next time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.